I'm Elle Palmer. I write a series that's totally like the stories we're going to talk about. It's a fairy tale retelling series where you basically combine the setting of Downton Abbey with like Disney princess fairy tales. So totally like the Hunger Games. Uh, there we go. Um, and here we have our excellent panel who's going to just briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with Allie.
Hi, I'm Allie May. Like Elle Palmer, I write totally exactly what we're talking about, fairy tale retelling. These are my favorites. I keep talking about this one, so maybe I'll switch to a different one. My story in this one is basically what happens to the witch in the fairy tales who wants the firstborn child, and it's what happens afterward when she doesn't really want the baby and she doesn't know how to take care of the baby, and now she has to return the baby because it's driving her nuts. And it's kind of this really funny story, and it's got a touch of heart and a little bit of drama and a cute cat named Voodoo.
My name is Blake Casselman. I'm the one non-novelist of the panel. I actually am a comic book writer, film producer, and screenwriter based in Salt Lake City. I also have published some short stories, and I'm happy to be here.
And I'm Garrett. I write action adventure, clean and full of lots of dangerous child's play, you could say. I have a science fiction dystopian series where there's a young troublemaker who gets into some danger, and then there's a Mesoamerican fantasy trilogy where a troublemaker once again gets into some danger, but he didn't initiate it in that case. So it's my bread and butter is to put people in danger. It's fun.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a good story. Why?
Oh, yeah.
What's the point of the story if they're not in danger?
I know,
Sure.
right?
So speaking of danger, so we're here to talk about war games that have involving children. So things like Maze Runner, Hunger Games, Ender's Game, and other stories like that. So first question, why do you think that we are so fascinated by putting children in these life or death situations? Or why are we so fascinated? Why is our society so fascinated by these stories?
First of all, the audience is kids, and the audience likes seeing people exactly like them overcome the impossible and come out on top, and sometimes topple a government on the way. And it's the impossible. We love seeing people do the impossible because we can't.
I would add that, I mean, so we write YA. My books are YA. So my audience is technically young people. But I also have adults who read my books and who get a kick out of it. And for me, I don't want to see kids in danger, but I'm delighted for some reason to see that in books and stories and movies where kids are in danger. But then, like we just heard, they overcome it and they kind of fight against the man. That seems to be a big theme in a lot of these, is that there's some big mysterious power that's trying to impose its will or has imposed its will, and some young person who's got a lot of pluck will go out and stop them. I'm not sure what it is about the young people doing that, but it certainly has a lot of draw. And I like it. I mean, as a young person, I wanted to go out and stick it to the man too. So
I think also we have a situation where the world, and thinking back when we were kids, the world presents a lot of things that are outside of our control. And what's more outside of our control than a dystopian society? Something run by the adults. Kids are forced into things that they may not want to do. And I look back when I was a kid, and there were things I felt powerless to change. And here are stories where the kids gain the power they need to make the changes, to fight against those things that are out of control. And I think there's a appeal for that. I think there's an appeal for kids and for us older people. I don't know. in a way, it's almost nostalgic. We read these stories about kids, even if we're in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it kind of puts us in a place where we were when we were much younger, and that's not a terrible place to go to.
One of the things I wrote down, because I didn't want to forget it, I wrote down, we love to see flaws in the government. That's what dystopia has always been. We love picking at flaws in the government. Doesn't matter your political stance. We can always pick at and find little tiny things. And that's what dystopia has always, always been. From 1984, Brave New World, to even now with the Hunger Games and things like that. That's what it's based on. And one of the biggest shifts we've seen in dystopian in books and in movies is that you go back and you read 1984 as the big example. The hero doesn't win. The government wins. And it's what made that story so powerful with its message. But now we like to see the people win. We don't like to see the government win. And it's been this really great shift to see these kids, especially, come from nothing to, Katniss overthrowing an entire government because her sister's name got called to go die in the Hunger Games. And it's this, this setup that it seems entirely impossible, especially because we have this foundation where the government always wins and the people lose. And now it's fun to see how can they figure it out? How can they win? How can they, do what was once impossible?
And Katniss is an interesting example of the protagonists of these books, because these aren't kids that are introduced in chapter 1 saying, or in the first act of a film saying, I don't like how things are, I'm going to change them. They are forced into these situations. Katniss did not wake up saying, hey, I'm going to start a rebellion. She was put in that position because she wanted her little sister to live and not have to go into the Hunger Games. Ender did not wake up and say, hey, I'm going to end the war with the I can't remember what card changed the name of the aliens to.
Bugs.
But the military took him and put him in that position. And then
against his will, against his parents' will.
Right. Katniss took it from there. And I think that's the appeal of these characters is that they're pushed into or put into an extraordinary situation. And when they have the opportunity in that situation to make the difference, they go there.
Well, and even in the Hunger Games, you get to the second book, and she still is not like, I am ready to destroy the government. It's still like, I am just trying to survive each and every day. And then she gets thrown in again. Yeah.
I think what you guys are saying is really key. And one of the reasons that this is so appealing to us is that, and I think, Allie, what you said about how there's a shift where we get the happy ending, I think that there's also been a shift in that instead of the chosen one trope, these young people are the choosing ones, in that, they're put in a situation, something happens to them. And the question then is, how far will you go to save the person you love, or to keep your family or the loved ones safe, or to essentially to ultimately eliminate the danger that's putting all these people into peril? How far will you go? What are you willing to give? And what will cause you to be willing to give your life or to put yourself into that kind of danger? And in Katniss's case, of course, it's her sister. And I mean, I tried to make sure that it's really clear that it's in my books, and I love to see in these other books that these kids aren't just regular old kids. In Katniss's case, she is defying the laws a little bit, and she is kind of rebelling a little bit, but she has no pretensions that she's going to go and overthrow the government. But she is her own person, and she's not willing to just be completely conformist to all the rules and stuff. And I like that a lot. I really like the troublemaker who's like, oh crap, I made a little more trouble than I thought I would. I'm going to give it all. Here we go. Let's do this. it's pretty cool.
Well, and I think there's a big difference between Katniss's situation in the Hunger Games versus Ender and Ender's Game, where by the end of Katniss's story, she has been pushed to the point where she has no choice but to take down the government. And she was repeatedly forced in that position. And I think the movies especially did a really great job, the last two movies, of showing her PTSD, her depression, this, you know, she is ready to just not exist anymore. And once again, she gets pushed back into it. They keep forcing this on her. And to the point where she finally makes a choice. She takes her bow and arrow and she shoots it. And with Ender's Game, one of the biggest things is that he doesn't know he's making choices. It's a secret to him until the very, very end, until it's over. And it's an interesting difference, especially because Ender was much younger when he was put in that position, whereas Katniss was 17 at the end of the book.
Katniss went looking for trouble too, and Ender was brilliant, right?
Yeah, Ender was definitely a chosen one, whereas Katniss was not.
Right.
And then there's another type of hero. We mentioned the Maze Runner. We have the character of Thomas. His extraordinary situation is not only the world he's put in, the maze itself and the community that services that maze, but he doesn't have his memory. He learns about this world as the audience is learning about it, and then once he is able to gauge what's going on, what the stakes are, then he makes the choice.
Yeah.
And so again, we have someone who's a choosing one, but it's the avenue he came in to the situation was much different than Katniss or Ender.
Yeah. And I think it's fun that we can take this idea of this hero character, and there are still so many different ways we can play off of this idea of the unwilling chosen one, that there's still so much unexplored in these dystopian stories, that these war game stories, there's still so much left to explore.
Definitely.
So how would these stories be different if these protagonists were adults?
Adults are smarter, maybe a little less emotional.
They might.
And sometimes, I was gonna say, sometimes we need that emotional drive to move the story forward. It's
it's an interesting question. I think adults either might make fewer stupid choices, and of course, dumb choices, as Jeff Savage says. Dumb choices make for good stories.
Yep.
So maybe adults would make fewer dumb choices, but also we might be less forgiving of the dumb choices that an adult makes, because they should know better. But the youth, maybe we're like, oh no, that's a natural choice for them to make. We maybe identify with it more. I sure do. I'm in my 40s, and I don't feel like a very mature human being sometimes. So I identify very much with these young protagonists.
And teens are very much driven by hormones, by emotions.
Fair enough.
These characters do things that really add to the story, really add to the conflict. That an adult character might be more cautious about doing, and I think that ties into what Jared was talking about with the making dumb decisions. There seems to be something driving them other than ethics and morality, and I think that's something, even as an adult looking back when you were a kid, you can relate to that.
And then it's got me thinking about maybe like 1984. What if 1984's protagonist was a teenage girl or a boy? how much different would that be? Maybe that youngster wouldn't have known when to just give in. Would have just said, "No, I'm still not done. I'm going to keep pushing."
Well, and even the opposite. With, I mean, in 1984, the characters are tortured.
Yeah.
I feel like they almost had to be adults in order for readers to be able to, make it to the end, to get there, because seeing that happen to someone so young, someone seemingly so innocent, we often associate innocence with young characters, and less so with the adult characters. And the fact that the government wins in the end would almost be unforgivable to readers if they were teenagers, if they were kids.
Right. Well, you can even go. You can even go before 1984. Lord of the Flies, which was written in the 50s. This is probably a distant ancestor to the modern teen dystopian. But put adults on that island, it's a very different, probably very boring story.
Yes.
Here again, the trope is for stuff like Hunger Games and Ender's Game and Maze Runner, the kids win. Extraordinary Odds. In Lord of the Flies, the kids lose, and it's not until the adults show up at the end of the novel. Spoiler alert! Sorry.
Spoiler alert for a book that most of us probably had to read in high school.
Yeah.
Why is that book still in print? Well, probably because everyone has to read it in high school. But it's not until the adults show up that the kids are saved. They don't save themselves.
Right. I really don't like that book. little plug for a bunch of sadism. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And the movie was deeply disturbing. I think there was
absolutely
in the.
But it's interesting looking at that book. It's interesting looking at that book and comparing it to what we have now.
Yeah.
In that same type of genre.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, I think you also have to look at Lord of the Flies slightly differently than you do the Hunger Games and Ender's Game, because Lord of the Flies is more of a literary novel versus Hunger Games and Maze Runner and Ender's Game are more genre popular fiction novels.
Right.
And so the audience is different.
Yeah.
Lord of the Flies is very much on the nose allegory as well, for those boarding schools and stuff. Whereas I think modern dystopians, there's still some allegory, but we can definitely see controlling and of communication and how people behave, in the real world. But I think it's less on the nose sometimes.
Yeah.
And 1984 is very much an allegory in many ways too. I mean, you have the same author doing Animal Farm, which is an allegory of the Russian Revolution. So, it's interesting how you have these books that are maybe set the foundation for modern day teen dystopia, but we're allegories, and it's interesting to see how the storytelling has evolved.
It is
into the genre you talk
about. Do you guys have examples where this kind of war game with children didn't work out, so that it's not as successful as a story?
I think it depends a lot on personal opinion, because I would throw out the Maze Runner. At least the movie. I did not enjoy the movie. I could not get into it. And I don't know that I could put my finger on why. I think because I was just, the audience was so lost the entire time if you hadn't read the book. And you hit a point where you're halfway through the movie and you're like, why am I still watching this movie? I don't know why I'm rooting for these characters, why I'm rooting against the all-powerful government antagonist or whatever who put them in this situation, to where you don't fully grasp the stakes. And I feel like it's the same problem a lot of authors encounter where they start too far into the action without setting the stage properly, that you can't connect with it the way you can if you have a little bit more. And that was just my problem with it. I know it was very, very popular, but I feel like the movies didn't do it as well. But I also, conversely, I feel like the last Hunger Games book didn't do it as well as the movies did. I feel like the movies brought the story back from this kind of what felt to me like a very rushed ending. And the movies made it much more real, much more emotional. And maybe it was just the narrator with her PTSD that she kind of just withdrew from everything and there was no emotion in the book. Whereas in the movie, there's still a lot of, you have all the other characters that still have all these emotions that I think helped the viewers connect with it better than the book did.
Well, in terms of a narrative, too, you go to the third Hunger Games book, what happens at the end? Katniss's sole reason for entering the fray in the first book, she doesn't succeed in the end.
Right.
In regards to, I don't want to give away any spoilers, or would that be okay to give away?
Spoiler alert. I don't know. We had some spoilers on Shakespearean plays yesterday.
She volunteered to save her sister's life, and in the end, she didn't save her sister's life. Right. And a lot of people were upset about that.
But for good reason.
Oh, I was, but I felt that it did a really good job of bringing the story full circle. It as reading the books for the first time, I was so angry. I think I threw the book across the room. I was like, I cannot believe this is how it ended. That was terrible, bad writing. And then when the movies came out, I was just like, oh my gosh, this story is so good. The way that that it's, her whole motivation. And then at the end, after her sister dies, and she's there, and they're still using her as this Mockingjay symbol, and and she's there, and she's got her bow, and she's going to kill President Snow, and then it's one of the things that I loved about her character is that she finally makes a choice for herself, and she takes the bow and arrow that's supposed to kill President Snow, and she turns around and kills the other guy, and it's this interesting thing, I think, that she literally had nothing left to lose. And because she had nothing left to lose, it pushed her to new heights as a character that I felt like didn't come across as well in the book. But yeah, I thought as a writer, as a storyteller, I kind of loved that. But as a reader, I hated it.
Well, and it's a reminder that you can put your characters in situations where they fail. Life is about failure. And failure and disappointment and tragedy even is what helps us grow. And that's a good reminder. Maybe young people, maybe that's a message they don't want to hear, but it's as they get older, it's a message they certainly realize and as they experience failure and other negative things.
One of the classic endings that we, for stories, you always have just super generic. You have the character, you have their goal, and you can either end with them achieving their goal, you can end with them reaching their goal, realizing it wasn't what they wanted. They don't reach their goal, they get something better, except, there's all these different ways. And it was a really nice play off of that. Her whole goal was protecting her sister. In the end, she couldn't do that. So what could she do to then get something that would be better for the future? You know, how could she get there because she had nothing left to lose? And I feel like it was a really good way of exploring that, of readers could then put themselves in that situation and say, oh man, what would I do if I was Katniss? And it kind of makes you reflect on yourself.
So I think we've done a really good job talking about kind of the protagonist and the motivation and how that helps really, that this world of conflict really helps define that character. But one of the things I think would be interesting to go into a little bit is the societal structures that show up in those war games, of who becomes the alpha type person, and how that works. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Too many.
Ask that one more time. Let me make sure I'm hearing the right thing.
Okay. So within these war games, it's kind of the sub society of both the Hunger Games and Ender's Game, as well as the Maze Runner, that you have this community and this kind of societal structure forms of who's kind of in charge of this group, and they break off into the different groups. And I was wondering if you guys could kind of discuss that a little bit. How that works.
I feel like in the Hunger Games, there were almost two different societal structures. There's the structure of Panem, the land and the government and the district, and then inside of the Hunger Games, there's a totally different structure. There's a chaos of people competing to then gain the power. And it's interesting because people are making alliances with people that they know that they're going to have to kill at some point or be killed by, because that's the whole setup of the game. And it's very, very different than the setup of Panem, which is very structured. Each district has specific jobs that they're supposed to do, and there are wealthy districts, there are poor districts. You have the capital of people who just live their lives partying luxury all the time. And I think the second book or the second movie did a really good job of illustrating the stark contrast between the two. At the beginning, when they go on their victory tour, and they're actually seeing the Capitol firsthand for the first time. And she's like, I hate it so much because we literally just fought for our lives. And now some of these people want us to die because we chose not, because I didn't kill him. I chose to save him and myself at the same time. And it was this whole thing that's a very stark contrast of nobody's in power. And I think they get like the little gifts with they have like the silver parachutes that drop down gifts for them that like the sponsors are sending them things. And it's just a really interesting setup of Katniss was very independent. She would go and hunt for food because her mom had PTSD and depression and couldn't take care of them as a family. And so she had to go out and do all these things to take care of them as a family. And then she goes into the Hunger Games and everything is set against her. And she kind of has to rely on Haymitch, who she can't stand, because he's a drunk, and she has to rely on him to send her those things so that she can survive sometimes in the game. And it just is a really, there almost is no structure for it. And she hates it. Not that she likes the structure of Panem, but she was used to it. She was accustomed to it. She could deal with it. And then being thrown into the Hunger Games, she doesn't know what to do with it. You have like the districts who they train their entire life to fight in the Hunger Games. And she's like, are you kidding me? Like, these people always win. And it's, and she has to figure out how to overcome that. It's chaos, and it was good for her, I think, to experience that chaos. And then in the second Hunger Games, when she goes back, it's a different kind of chaos, and she has to make a lot more allies. And again, she's like, but I'm going to have to kill these people, or they're going to have to kill me, especially because she doesn't know what's really going on behind the scenes. That it's another hard structure for her to adjust to, that someone else seems to be in charge, that you have Finnick and I can't remember her name, Joanna, and you have, all these other people who know more about what's going on than she does, and she does not like it. And then when she gets out of it, she's like, I just want to go back and do nothing. I want to go back to the old structure. And it kind of does a crisis of character on her, crisis of faith, where she's like, is there even a good structure for society? Whereas like Ender's Game, again, he's kind of taken and forced into this, and doesn't really, there's all there's all the like shadowy adults who don't have names, don't have faces, and he's just a kid, and he's like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, and he just.
Let me just give Blake and Jared a little bit more of a chance to.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot.
It was good. It was good. You were getting really passionate.
I was interested. No, you talk about control. As I was doing some research for this panel and looking at different teen dystopian novels and films and TV series, it struck me how many have come out since 9/11, since 2001. And, you look at the aftermath of 9/11 and the world changed. The world changed in many ways. You go to an airport, you can't walk your friend or family member that's flying. You can't walk them to the terminal anymore. You can't, if you're flying, you have to take off your shoes. You have to do a full body scan. You have to have things searched. You need a star on your driver's license to fly. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act after 9/11 changed a lot of things for us. And so yeah, it makes sense that we live in a different world, over the past 20, or is it 20 years. Wow. We live in a changed world over the past 20 years, and the world is often reflected in art, and certainly teen dystopia was around before 9/11, but you have to wonder, why has it become so prevalent since? I've read articles that talked about how zombie storytelling has also increased quite a bit since 9/11 as well. And I think it's just the art is reacting to the changed world we're in. And you have young people, again, living in a world where the adults are saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, where when their parents were younger, they could do these things. And so it makes sense that there would be this niche of storytelling where young people are fighting against that control. Those adults saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, even though they're aware of a previous time when that control wasn't there.
I think, just to add a little bit there, I think that the power structures are very interesting to explore, and the series and the books that do explore what power means, what kind of power we're talking about, can be more successful. In the Hunger Games, you see what seems like an all-powerful government controlling everything for their reasons, not righteous reasons. And you see the Maze Runner, doing the murky people who I never quite understand, honestly, in those books. Never really quite understand who's behind the curtain. They're doing what they're doing for their reasons, and they seem to have all power. But then you find that these young people start to explore what power really means, what freedom actually means. Is it is freedom to do whatever you want without consequences? No, usually they discover that freedom is a mental thing where you say, I will not bow to this power, this kind of external third-party power that's trying to have power over me. I'm going to take power for myself, and I'm going to tell my own story, and I'm going to determine my own story. And so I think that that's one great area that really good dystopian and really good kind of these war game type stories explore. And another one is that actually, I think Katniss was more of an adult by the end of those books. So she ended up choosing the I just want some peace in my life choice, which a lot of adults were like, you know what, man, I am tired. Like Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon, I am getting too old for this crap. I think those books that do explore what comes after that overthrow are really interesting. You know, you've got some all-powerful entity that's controlling things, and then they lose. What's next? Is it absolute chaos? Is it anarchy? Those are neat books for me, and they explore, again, what power means. Is it power to tell people what to do? Or is it power to determine my own destiny? And those are cool questions, I think, in these books.
Or Jared, you have books like The Giver, where the young person is the catalyst for the change, and their attitude once the change is taking place is, I'm going to make sure that this change. It's like they take the responsibility on their shoulders instead of saying, I just want to go live my life in peace. They say, I want to make sure that this change is something that's going to be long lasting, and it's not going. We're not going to go back to the old ways as well.
Absolutely. I love The Giver,
and I think that goes. I think that goes back to a lot of the time why these characters are kids, and because kids are always being told what to do by parents, by school teachers, by every adult they encounter in their lives. And when you don't have any control really over what, you don't get any choices of what to do. You have to go to school every day. You have to do this. You have to do your chores. You have to clean your room. You have to, I took piano lessons as a kid and I hated it for the longest time. I love it now, but I hated it for the longest time. And my mom would not give me the choice to give up. And then, of course, by the time I was like 16, 17, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. But by then I had been taking piano lessons for 12 years and it felt like torture. I didn't get any choices. And so we like these characters who then can teach us that even though we can't control all our situations, we can find little pieces of things in our lives to control. Katniss went to the Hunger Games to protect her sister. It was the only semblance of control she had. And as that fits into any structure, even as adults. Or still, you have to go to work. You have to make money. You have to pay rent. You have to, put food on the table and all these things. And you have a little bit more sense of control, but not entirely. And I think we like seeing characters put in these situations and finding a way to control something.
Yeah.
Well, even as adults, that control can be taken away from us. You talked about paying rent, providing food and shelter and other things. What about losing?
I have a 3-year-old. I don't get to control my time.
But what about losing your job and suddenly you don't have the ability? That control is taken away from you for however long you're unemployed. So it's things that kids deal with. Certainly, you have to as a source of conflict in my house. But as an adult, we've all had times in our lives when health or finances or a number of things are taken away. The power to control these things are taken away from us, and maybe that's one kernel of reason why adults still, the YA or teen dystopian genre has a pretty big adult audience. It's not just the kids watching and reading this stuff.
It's still pretty popular, even though publishers aren't really picking them up right now. Just to really bring that home, I think that what we're all getting at is, we're finding these characters who do take control, who do take the power for themselves by saying, I'm not playing by your rules anymore, or I'm going to play by this new set of rules that I'm going to determine now. I just heard Bill Murray in Groundhog Day say, I'm not playing by their rules anymore. Anyway, you take power back to yourself and you start to determine your own steps inside of these restrictions that are around you. I mean, I don't want to get too personal. I grew up in a cult and had to escape when I was 17. And that was part of my process until I was 17 was, excuse me, I'm not getting emotional. My voice is tired. Was saying, you know what, this sucks bad. And these people do terrible things. And they ask me to do terrible things. And I don't want to live by that, by those rules anymore, but I have to. But in my head, I'm going to be living in this way that makes sense to me, that gives me power and control over my own life. And so seeing these in dystopian, it's like, hey, this is my life here, but in a far different way. But also, like Blake said, you get laid off, you feel powerless. But then we can be our own hero. We can read it in books and we can be our own hero and say, yeah, you laid me off. Watch where I am in a year.
Well, you have Katniss, who at the end of the Hunger Games leaves the government behind. She goes off and she starts her own little family. And that's where she finds her semblance of control. I'm not playing by your rules anymore. I don't want to be your Mockingjay anymore. So she leaves. And you have the same thing in Ender's Game. At the end, he's like, I don't want to play by your rules anymore. I'm going to leave. And he literally gets in a spaceship and leaves.
And those
does. Yeah. And so it's, you get to see that. And we get to see their journeys of how they get to that point at the end from the beginning. And we like to see that because we can see ourselves in it. We all find different parts of their personalities to latch onto, that we see ourselves in them. And it's why art and books and movies and TV, it's why these things are still being made so widely, because we as human beings, no matter our age, we still latch onto that escape.
Yeah, it's cathartic. It's great.
We have at least one audience question.
Okay.
And that is, and I think this is an interesting one, is after all this is from a person whose tag is Tree Hugger. After all the real world school shootings, I couldn't even read or watch the Hunger Games for years. How do readers/viewers feel okay with watching children killing children when it's on the news?
I think it's part of dealing with the true life horrors of this world, which include school shootings. I think people turn to escapism in a way to deal with them, and everyone kind of deals with it in their own way.
Yeah,
certain things I don't particularly want to watch or read based on some of my past trauma. But at the same time,
like content warnings are important in books.
Yeah,
they are.
Because some people can experience a school shooting and can be fine reading things like the Hunger Games, and other people cannot.
Right. Yeah, and that's mileage varies, and you if somebody's seeking escape for their stories, if a certain story is not going to do that for them, there are lots of other stories.
Find a different story.
Yeah, lots of other stories. In my case, I tried to watch Leah Remini's stuff about Scientology, escaping Scientology, because that was the cult that I was in. I can't do it. Not entertaining, not cathartic. It's just lame. I don't want to see it. But I'm happy to read all the dystopians about these young people with stick it to the manitis. Those are awesome.
Well, in a roundabout way, that helps you. I'm guessing that helps you deal with the trauma you went through.
Because they win every time. Oh, yeah.
In some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the last few minutes, why don't we just take a minute, if you have any last thoughts, and then shameless plugs for any further panels you might have today, or some other thing you're excited about.
I have, one thought as I was reading through some of these these books and movies is that, Jared mentioned that publishers aren't looking for dystopian fiction right now. Maybe Hollywood's not looking to get the rights to dystopian fiction to make them into films or TV series. But one thing we've learned about art is that sometimes it's circular, in that things will go through a period of time where the decision makers aren't interested in this particular genre, this particular type of storytelling, but the world's always changing. Things are going on, and again, life reflects art. We don't know. Maybe the Capitol attack, which was a traumatic day for our country on January 6th, maybe looking ahead a year, 18 months, 2 years, maybe that will be part of the catalyst for people getting interested and having a hunger for this type of dystopian storytelling. And those authors that have some manuscripts that might seem useless now, or screenplays that might seem useless now, tucked away in a drawer, maybe in 2 years, suddenly that's what everyone will be looking for, and they can dust them off and do a polish or a rewrite. And their initial efforts to create this art wasn't in vain.
Nice. Excuse me. I'll just, last thought is, I know that in some cultures, the sad or the somewhat tragic ending is fairly popular. I'm delighted to be a part of a culture that really likes the happy endings. I like to see the good guys win, and I'm okay with somewhat murky good and bad, but if I've been rooting for somebody, I want to see them win. So I would recommend that if you're looking for some escapist fiction, there's plenty out there, especially in the dystopian area. And for a shameless plug, I'm on a couple more panels today, but I actually have a book coming out in 1 month, and this is called Finding Home. It is the sequel to a sequel I didn't know I'd write, to my first novel. And both these books are novelizations of my own life in a dystopian cult and getting out and finding happiness and finding home. So it's exciting. And it comes out in 1 month. I'm delighted.
It's awesome. Amy?
I have, it's okay. I have 2 more panels today at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Ergonomics for the creator, about taking care of your physical self when you're sitting in a chair, writing on a computer all day. And then one about finding authenticity and sensitivity readers. And I think my final thoughts on this are that, kind of going along with what both Jared and Blake said, there are stories out there for everyone. That's why there's not just one kind of story. There's not just fantasy or science fiction, happily ever after versus, your classic 1984 ending. There's books out there for everyone, and there's books for you to write as well. There's stories for you to write. Like, Jared, you're writing stories that are based on your own life, and you said you have even a harder time reading those kinds of things. But writing it is what helps you, and just, there's something out there for everyone, and there's 1.5 million different ways that you could write the same story over and over again. It's why retellings are so popular. And sometimes I seem like a critic for dystopian, because that's kind of what they are. They're there for people to pick apart and look at all the different thousands of different ways that it could have gone differently, and that's why they're so good, and that's why they're so popular. I think that's it.
And today's my last panel, so I get to relax the rest of the convention.
That's awesome. I've only got 3 more. 3 more.
Wow, it's a full day.
Yeah, I have 11 total. It's been a party.
You're busy.
And so I'll be up next with in 9 minutes for the Mother Knows Best Structures of Matriarchal Societies. And you can find me on my website, lplummerchronicles.com. Thank you guys for a great panel. Thanks to the audience for your interaction there. May your lives be much more warm and fuzzy than these dystopian stories we're talking about.
Thanks, y'all.
Everybody have a great day.
Bye.
May the odds be ever in your favor.